Hi, in this video we're going to cover all of the rotary machines, pretty much, in order. So last video we did the heat machines, and this video we're going to do the rotary machines. So let's get started. The first thing I'm just going to cover is a very, very minor feature, which is I can get some facades. And these come in a few different materials. And I can just put these on the gears and axles we showed in that basics of heat and in the basics of heat and rotary video. And they don't really affect how gears connect. In fact, you can still see the prongs through them because that's to show that the gears can still connect through them. But you can stand on them and they just sort of look like a solid wall. So if you wanted to hide your gears or axles behind a wall, you can do that if it's one of these materials. Or if you actually want to display it, glass. And I can just remove these with a wrench. Nothing too complicated there. Hand crank. Alright, we're going to do the hand crank again. This is a very, very simple power source for rotary power, and it's also a terrible one. Basically, you hold down right click, and it very slowly spins up the gear. And if I hold shift and right click, it spins it up in the other direction. This is a very bad power source. I would not recommend even trying to use this for anything other than like a millstone. You might find it useful for testing systems, like seeing if all the gears are connected properly. Let's see what's next. We're going to come back to this. Millstone. Speaking of millstone, that is pretty much the most basic rotary machine in terms of things that use rotary power to do stuff. So you can think of this as like a pulverizer from thermal expansion or a macerator from IC2. You put things in it, you give it power, it grinds it. So a very simple recipe, for example, is if I put some cobblestone in, it will grind it to sand, and of course all the recipes for this are in JEI. This thing uses up to 10 joules of rotary energy per tick. 1 unit of rotary energy is called a joule, and it uses up to 10 per tick, but it goes faster the higher the gear speed is. So if the gear speed is if it reaches peak speed at 5 and above, so at 5 radians per second and faster, it will consume 10 joules a tick and it'll go full speed. If you're at 2.5 radians, it's only going to consume 5 joules a tick and it's going to take twice as long. So this system is a terrible demo setup I made previously and does not run very fast, but you can see it is running. If I were to just very quickly make something that goes a little faster, this is a cheat wand, the rotary cheat wand. This is a creative mode only item. It's basically a hand crank, but much, much better. So let's do that, and now we can see a very high speed, much more than the 5 that this thing caps out at, and we can see it's processing much faster. See? A few recipes I want to point out with the millstone. It can grind down ores, and this will usually double ores. You can make sand out of cobblestone. That can be quite useful. Blocks of coal to gunpowder. Some people use this, other people don't care. Just a thing I want to mention. Other than that, it's pretty much just your traditional macerator / pulverizer stuff, you know. Like sugarcane into 2-sugar, or getting more stuff from blaze rods. You can grind smooth stone into gravel. That can also be quite handy, or gravel into flint plus sand. So it's a fairly simple machine, and it only connects to gearing on the top. And it itself has a moment of inertia. Remember, the gears had that I value that was like how heavy it was. It itself has one, so connecting it does mean you need a little more energy to build up momentum. And if I actually use my omnimeter on the millstone itself, you can see it itself does have some energy in it. So, but it's not very big, and it's not usually a huge factor. Drill, another very basic rotary machine. This comes in two variants. There's the normal drill, and there's the golden mechanical drill. And despite the name, golden is not automatically better. It's better in some respects, worse in others. So, this one's not connected to anything, is it? Okay, let's break you. So if we place down a drill somewhere, say over here, and we're just going to wrench that around, it connects to a gear or axle on the bottom. So let me just do that. Right. And like this, I'm bottoming at the back, and now you can see it's spinning with the gear. And this does two things. It breaks blocks and drops the item. So this is a rotary-powered block breaker. And it also hurts mobs. Oh, I still want that cheat wand, I think. So if I spawn, say, a sheep, and just so it doesn't get away, I'm going to put up a quick pen around it. Just a really quick one. You can see that it was getting drilled. It will hurt players too, so be careful about standing in front of it. Another thing about the drill is that it is more effective at higher speeds. So for example, at this very low speed it's spinning now, it can break things like sandstone and cobblestone. Now it's too slow to even break, okay, hold on. This demo setup is very strange. It can break things like cobblestone and sandstone, but if I were to place down some obsidian, it's not breaking that. Now, if I were to use my cheat wand to bring the speed way up, way up, because obsidian's quite hard, there we go. It can break the obsidian. So the higher the block hardness, the higher the speed the drill needs. So the actual formula's in here, but generally, pretty much any speed will work for things like cobble and sandstone and dirt, and you'll need very high speeds, like 8 to 10 or something, to break things like obsidian. Also, the higher the speed, the more damage it does. So at this very high speed, I'm not even going to build a pen for the sheep because it dies in one hit. And to speed this high, you really do not want to walk in front of this thing in survival mode because it will just kill you. Now, the golden version uses slightly more power. So this thing drew 3 joules per tick, and this draws 5. And it also has a higher moment of inertia, though moment of inertia is not a huge deal. But it does drain more power. And the difference with the golden version is it's exactly the same, except when it kills things, it counts as a player kill. So that's important for certain things. For example, things killed with a player kill drop XP. If I killed that with a normal drill, it would not drop XP. So let me show that. See, no XP. There's also certain drops in the game that only drop when the mob is killed by the player. Like, spider eyes only drop when a spider is killed by the player, so golden drills can get it. Things like that. Things like dropping armor from mobs wearing armor. Other things like that. So these are very good if you have a mob farm. Spring-loaded stuff we're going to come back to. Let's talk a little. Do I want to do? Yeah, we should probably do the power sources next. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the power sources for Rotary, because there are, at this stage in the game, there's a few. So besides the hand crank, there's also the wind turbine, the steam turbine, which we showed off in the previous video, but we're going to do again, and another machine called the Stirling engine. So let's do these in order. So the wind turbine is definitely the lowest power of those 3. If I just set it up, it needs quite a lot of empty space. It actually needs a 5x5, I want to say. It might be a 7x7. Let me check. a 5 by 5 empty space around it. So this space in front, if I place a block here, it will eventually realize that there is a block in the way and stop. And in fact, I can force it to realize that. But yep, in a minute, it'll realize there's a block in the way and stop. So it won't. So even though it's running now with a block in front of it, it will shut down after a minute when it recalculates. It doesn't do it very often for lag reasons. And it also needs to be able to see the sky. If it can't, it doesn't have empty space and it doesn't see the sky, it's just going to stop generating power. Now this one's actually generating quite a lot of power. We're getting 16.5 something joules out of it every tick, as you can see here. But you can see that number is changing. So the wind turbine is a really weird power source for a couple of reasons. First of all, once the speed reaches 2 radians a tick, like it has now, it shuts down. Like it's fluctuating. You can see the speed is fluctuating around 2 radians per tick. That actually says 2 radians per second. That's a minor glitch. It's actually, sorry, no, I'm wrong. It is 2 radians per second. I'm dumb. Sorry. Sorry, I've been saying, if I've been saying radians per tick, I should be saying radians per second. That's a minor nomenclature thing. So you can see it stops at 2 radians a second. It doesn't get any faster than that. So as I showed in the basics of rotary video, a good way to get around that limitation is to use some basic gearing like this, and then put the thing you actually want to power connected to the small gear. So if I want to run my Millstone, I would put it on this side, and now it's able to reach a much higher maximum speed than just 2. Okay. The other thing about wind turbines is that they do not produce a constant power output. The power output they produce is actually changing. So if we look at that number here, power gen, you can see it's currently going up. So the power fluctuates between 5 joules per tick and 25 joules per tick. That's a big range. That's a factor of 5. And to make things even worse, it will randomly switch direction at times. So right now we're making power in the positive direction, aka from this reference we're going counterclockwise, and from this direction we're going counterclockwise. At some point it'll switch direction and start making power in the clockwise direction, which wouldn't be so bad except there's a changeover period. I'm not going to be able to force it to do this, but basically what that'll happen is this thing's going to start making power going in the negative direction, all the momentum's in the positive direction, and there's going to be like 10 to 30 seconds or so, I don't know, it depends on how big your system is, where it's just fighting momentum and your wind turbine's actually slowing down your system because it's trying to go in the opposite direction until it finally gets it to a stop and gets spinning in the right direction again. Right? So when it switches direction, it's fighting momentum. If you have multiple wind turbines, they all have the same power output. So if I do this, like this one's making 24 and a bit, and this one's making 24 and a bit, they do the same power output at the same time. Now, ironically, I've actually hooked this up wrong. You can see they're spinning in opposite directions. They're actually making power in the same direction, so why are they spinning in opposite directions? Well, as you can see, this whole system is slowing down now because I've actually done the gearing here such that these two are forced to spin in opposite directions, right? Because if this is spinning counterclockwise, and if you look at the gearing, this would have to spin clockwise, which means that this one is actually fighting momentum, and this one's desperately trying to keep it spinning, so they're fighting each other. If I literally move you down one block, they'll be spinning together, and we won't be fighting momentum anymore. So yeah, these things do change direction. Oh, we're actually at negative power production now, so it's actually spinning the other way. They do change direction, they do change power output, and there's a way to fight this, or to not fight this, to make this less of a problem, which is if I put a reader circuit on this, it'll actually read out the power output. So that's reading -8 and a bit, and we're making -8 and a bit. So if I were to combine that with some very basic gearing that's like redstone sensitive, I can do some pretty clever stuff. So let me just get get some toggle gears, and I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to use different materials for the toggle gears just so that you can see exactly which gears they are. Oh, and I need some axles as well. These toggle gears don't have to be different materials, but I just wanted to make sure that it's clear which gear type is which. So I can say, when I say the inverted toggle gear, you won't be like, wait, what? Which gear? And I can just say, no, the golden one. I'm not going to bother hooking that one up. So this here is a very simple piece of gearing, and it's actually a bit of gearing that I make quite often. It's quite a convenient one, which is, this is a direction switch-a-majigger. That's the technical name. When this gets a redstone signal, one of these is a regular toggle gear, and the other is an inverted toggle gear. And I've got it set up now that whenever I give it a redstone signal, it's going to switch the direction on the gearing. See? So one of these starts meshing with that gear, the other one stops, and we switch the direction. So when and I've got it set up to the redstone signal from this wind turbine, so that when the sign on this wind turbine switches, we're going to switch the direction of the gearing, and we won't be fighting momentum because we've actually flipped the gearing on the wind turbine, so it's always working with the momentum of the system, right? So just with a few little mechanisms, very compact, and with a little thinking about the problem, I've made one of the issues with the wind turbine, which is that it keeps switching direction, basically just go away. But yeah, wind turbines, generally not great for things that need high speed or high power, because it's so unreliable in the power it generates, because it changes so much. Right? Because at one moment it might be making 5, and another it might be making 25. So it's a good early game power source. Or power source late game if you're just powering something that doesn't use a lot of power. You can always feel free to use early game solutions as late as you want, because sometimes they're just simplest. The other main power source is the steam turbine, which I covered in the last video, but I'm just going to very quickly do again. You put steam in the side, and you're not connecting because it comes out. This is not a turbine, is it? Oh, it is. Oh, because you put it on the bottom. I swear I know how to use my own mod. You put steam in the bottom, distilled water comes out the side, and you connect gears to the top, and this just makes a load of power using steam. Now, there's no steam running right now, so I'm just going to put some distilled water in, because every time I switch out that machine, there's always liquid steam or distilled water in there, and I always end up deleting it because I break and replace the machine. There we go. So this is a quite strong power source because it doesn't have a speed cap. It produces 100 joules per tick, which is quite a lot, using 500 millibuckets a tick of steam. But the thing is a turbine, a boiler, probably won't be producing 500 millibuckets per tick of steam. So that only happens for a boiler if it's above 500 degrees C. This one's at 400 degrees C-ish. So this one's making about is making about 400 millibuckets per tick of steam. So we're running this at around 80% of maximum speed, so we're getting around 80 joules a tick out of here. But that's still quite a lot of power. especially for this little setup, which I built horribly uncompactly. And we can see it's already getting up to like, without any gearing, any large gears at all, we're already getting up to like 8.8 radians a second, which is quite fast, especially since our wind turbine was only getting us to around 2 radians a second. Now the next power source is a Stirling engine. Now a Stirling engine is another way of turning heat into rotary power, but it's quite different. So it's different in a few ways. The first of all is that with steam power, it was generally the hotter you get, the more power you get. With the Stirling engine, it actually has 2 heat inputs. So it has a heat input on the side, and it has a heat input on the bottom. And these are 2 separate heat inputs, okay? Like if I click on it, you can see there's side temperature and there's bottom temperature being reported separately. And that's because this machine doesn't make power based on how hot you get. It makes power based on the temperature difference between the 2 inputs. So, well, let me show you. I think a demonstration is in order here. I'm just going to do it with axles so we can see the machine more clearly. If I put a firebox here and just say a little bit of coal, yeah, let's get a little more. That's going to start heating up, and we can see this thing is now starting to turn. It's making power. The animation's playing. We are making power, and we can see that this cable is heating up. So this cable was heating up, and now this one is. But I said they're separate, and they are. So what's actually happening is, as this thing runs, it moves heat between the 2 inputs. But this thing makes power based on the temperature difference, not based on the temperature. So that means we're actually losing efficiency, right? If this thing is at around 1,000 degrees C and this thing is at around 1,000 degrees C, there's a very small or no temperature difference, and we're not going to be making much power. This thing's slowing down now. It's like not making as much power as it was a minute ago because this side started to heat up. Well, if only there were a way to cool down this cable so that we could take full advantage of the heat we're making. This is a good use for the heat sink. So now you can see the temperature of this cable's very quickly dropping. This one, not so quickly. And now the power production is actually going up again. And the more this cools, the more efficient we're going to be. Oh, the firebox stopped. Okay, let me put more fuel in. So this one's basically back to room temperature. This one's still hot. And we can see that there's a big difference between the side and bottom temperature, and we're making a good amount of power. The weird thing is, because it's a temperature difference and not temperature, we can actually run this thing cold. So if I get rid of my firebox and I use an ice box instead, we don't have to run it with heat. We can run it with cold. So if I do that, this is going to drop that temperature. Give it a moment. And now we're making power because one input is colder than the other, right? There is a temperature difference. It's not a big one. This is around 50 degrees C. That's very small, but it's a temperature difference. So we can produce power with heat or with cold. Or, if we want to, we can use both, right? Because if we're actively cooling one side and heating the other, then we've got an even bigger temperature difference. Even more power. So this is quite a lot of power we're going to produce with this. So now I should probably mention how much power do we actually make on this thing. It's very, very weird. It's efficient. And the efficiency the rate at which it uses heat goes up as the temperature difference gets bigger. Well, no, it doesn't use heat, sorry. The rate it moves heat between the 2 inputs gets faster as the temperature difference gets bigger. So maybe with a 100 degrees C temperature difference, it's only moving 5 degrees C between the two inputs per tick. But at a 200 degrees C temperature difference, it's moving 10, and at 300, it's moving 15, and so on. And the more heat it moves between the two inputs, the more power it makes. But the efficiency also goes up as the temperature difference gets bigger, right? So as you can see in the third line of the tooltip here, if we double the temperature difference, we move heat twice as fast, and we get twice as much heat for every twice as much power for every degree moved. So we're making 4 times as much power with only twice as much input. So this thing can get really, really efficient. With a low temperature difference, it's less efficient with than steam. With a high temperature difference, it's more efficient than steam. Okay? The other thing is that this machine is also speed capped. Like the wind turbine, it has a speed cap. This actually stops producing at 1 radian a second. 1 radian a second, not very fast. But this thing makes so much power at the higher efficiencies, at the higher temperature differences, that if we want to use a lot of gearing, we're fine. We're fine to do this. To remember, use our gearing trick again to ramp up the speed. And heck, I can do it several times. Let me just attach you. You do it several times, and maybe this thing's only going to be spinning at 1 radian a second, but pretty soon this thing's going to be spinning at 9. You can see it's spinning up. It's speeding up now. And we can produce even more power at even higher efficiencies if I were to whack another firebox on here or get a better heat source, is basically what I'm saying. See? So this is a very, very efficient way of making power with heat if you can get a really big temperature difference. All right. The interesting thing to note is that biome temperatures are different in different biomes. So if you were to somehow, let's just say hypothetically, because there might be ways to do this, like there are ways to do this later in the mod, if you were to somehow get a nether biome next to a snow biome, and I know what you're thinking, there are no snow biomes in the nether, and there's no nether biomes in the overworld, but you can use something later game to do some biome changing. You could actually literally power a Stirling engine by just having a heat sink in the snow biome and in the nether biome and just running a Stirling engine on the temperature difference between them, and that's basically free power. Not a ton of free power because the temperature difference isn't huge, but still it's free power. So, that's just a thing to keep in mind. Okay, so that's the Stirling engine. The next topic, now that we've covered the main power sources, has got to be the more advanced things that use power. So, I really don't want to do the... Okay, we're going to do the spring winding stand. And I'm going to need to clear my inventory. And we're going to need a whirly gig. So there are several items in the mod that do various cool stuff. By the way, don't build terrible, weird little setups and demo setups in little corners because they will melt. Like that one did, because I spent all of 6 seconds designing it, and most of that 6 seconds was spent typing things into creative mode. So that was a terrible design, and therefore the cable melted because we were just making too much heat. Let's break that. So there are several items in the mod that are, think of them like handy little devices. That's a bad description. There are various items in the mod that need to be charged with rotary power. That's a better description. So one of those items is the whirly gig. We're going to get to what this thing does in a minute, but in a bit. But basically, look at the tooltip and you see springs speed 0 out of 10. That's how much this thing has been charged with rotary power. 0 out of 10. There are a bunch of items where if I type in spring speed, they have little tooltips that say spring speed 0 out of 10. Okay, we want to wind them up. So the machine to do that is the spring winding stand. And I actually have a setup over here from the spotlight that I think would be quite helpful here. This is a lot of redstone circuitry for a machine that is not super complicated, but I should okay. So the spring winding stand is one of the machines in the mod where it's possible to mess up. Where if you do it wrong, some consequences happen. I know we all hate consequences, but you know. So every time it gets a redstone pulse, it's going to wind up the item in it by 0.2, right? So will be at 0.2 out of 10. But you just heard that noise, right? The little sound like a thing shattering. Yeah? That was our whirligig being destroyed. We just destroyed our whirligig. See? Every time I do this. So we've currently got a destroy the whirligig machine. So how do we wind it up without destroying it? Well, the gear on top needs to be spinning. And it needs to be spinning in the positive direction. So if I get a rotary cheat wand again, if I now charge it up, we can see 0.2 spring speed and the item's still here. But the moment the speed of the spring winder drops below 0.2, this item's going to break again. So let's wait a moment. And there we go. So we need to keep the speed of the winder greater than the speed of the item being wound. Okay, so if I do that again, if we wind it up a little bit more, so now we're at let's say we're at 1.4 now. If the speed drops below 1.4, the item's going to break. Items breaking, clearly a bad thing. There we go. Now, you might think that means you have to get the speed above 10. It does if you want to fully wind your thing, but you don't have to. Most of the items in the mod, well, every item in the mod that can be wound in the spring winder, will work below full charge. They just don't work as well. Like, the whirligig will mostly work at like 6 out of 10 or 8 out of 10. It works best at 10 out of 10. It's going to last longest before you have to rewind it, but it'll work at 6 out of 10 or 3 out of 10. Okay, so that's the thing to note. The other thing is that the spring winding stand actually uses power. So when there is an item in it, if I like this whirligig, it's going to use power. And it's going to use more power the more wound the item is. So this thing is wound at 0 out of 10, so it's not using any power. Now it's wound at 0.2 and it's using a little bit. If I keep winding it, we're at 1.8. It's using a small amount of power. And it just broke. Because I think we got up to around 5 there. And at 5 you use quite a lot of power. 1.6, we're going to drain power quite quickly. We're going to break this thing again. So the more you wind something, the higher the speed needs to be, and the more power you're going to use. Okay? So this culminates in this mess over here, which is a demo build that I built for the mod Spotlight, and is not the greatest in the world. You can design better. This actually runs on redstone. This is a power source, a rotary power source we're not covering in this video because this is actually a beams thing. But it's a pretty good rotary power source, as you can see, because we're speeding up quite quickly. And the way this machine works is it's using circuitry, those things from Essentials, to keep an eye on the spring winding stand and see what's going on. So for example, a reader circuit reads how wound the item currently in here is. So you can see it's 1.8 while the item is wound to 1.8 and so on. So this mess of circuitry looks at the speed that the system is spinning. It looks at the gear speed, using this clutch here. It looks at the speed of the item being wound, and it just has a timer, like a redstone clock, that's just pulsing the spring winder. And the moment it realizes that the speed of the item is only a little bit below the gear speed, like the item's at 6.6 and the gear's at like 6.8, and the circuit realizes that if it winds it anymore, it's going to break, it just it enables the hopper underneath the winder and just lets it pull the item out. Because right now, you see the hopper's powered, so it can't pull out items. And the moment we pass our safety threshold, whoop, it disabled this redstone torch. I don't know if you saw. Let me do that again. Watch the torch. And the item comes out. Now this one is actually wound all the way to 10. I've also got this circuit set up so that if we reach 10, it just pulls the item out. So this is quite a good little setup, but you could definitely design a better one. One that's simpler, for one thing. The thing about this whole winding stand is because the power usage is determined by the speed of the item being wound. Oh yeah, that's another thing. Breaking an item releases some of the energy that went into winding it. Because the power usage is determined by how wound the item is, you don't need to be producing enough power to keep it above 10 radians a second even when there's a fully wound item in there. You could build up energy, store it in momentum with a large gear, right? Because these large gears have a lot of mass, they can store a lot of energy and momentum, and then wind it up super quickly and pull out the whirligig before the speed has dropped below 10. So you can sort of, by keeping it in the whirligig for as little time as possible, you can drain as little power as possible for using on the winder. That's another thing you can do. So this is the point where I show you what these items being wound up actually do. So this is the whirligig. This is quite a handy little device. I'm not flying with creative mode. This is me using the whirligig. It accelerates you straight up. Just straight up. And the more wound it is, the faster it accelerates you, and you'll notice that it is actually using the spring speed while I hold down right click. The other thing is it will eliminate fall damage, so I won't take fall damage if I manage to activate it before I hit the ground. Now if I get one that's only a little bit wound, you're going to see very quickly how 10 out of 10 is so much better than like 6 out of 10. I need a better power source. Or I need a timer. I just put it in that automatic winder over there, but that one's too good and it always gets it to 10. I want like a mediocre charge on one. Sure, 4.4 out of 10. That'll do. So if I do use this, we're actually not getting enough acceleration to pull me off the ground. Not enough lift. But it is enough to slow my falling and reduce fall damage. So below a certain winding, it'll only reduce fall damage and won't eliminate it. So below 6 radians a second, it only reduces fall damage, and above that, it'll actually bring you upward. These are actually quite handy. I find they're really good for just getting up cliffs and out of holes. Great when combined with an elytra to get lift. Stuff like that. But they're not great for getting sideways on their own, because all I can do is sort of fall in the general direction. The other wound device is the spring-loaded crossbow, which is a very, very unusual weapon. I'm in creative mode, so it doesn't use arrows. In survival mode, this uses arrows. Now, I should probably be in survival mode because by being in creative mode, it looks far better than it actually is. So, hold on. Come on. Okay. So, you can see this thing is fully wound. And it says it's going to do 50 damage. It does 50 damage if it's fully wound. Most of the time, these aren't fully wound because winding things up to 10 speed is kind of hard. So usually you'll be wound up to like 6 and it'll do far less than 50 damage. If I shoot this, it'll use an arrow and it will completely unwind the weapon. So for every single shot, I have to go back to my spring winder and wind it all over again. But if it's fully wound, it does 50 damage. Most things in this game will just die if you hit them with 50 damage. Boss mobs generally won't. So, you know, use that responsibly. It's pretty much only a weapon that's useful against really strong mobs, like iron golems, or if you're trying to kill like the Ender Dragon and you just have a hotbar full of them. So you can just pew, 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 just whittle its health down. Or in PvP, it can be quite effective. Of course, 50 damage is not quite an insta-kill when they're wearing full enchanted armor, but it's pretty good. Okay. There's, I believe, only one pair of machines left. I am correct. Stamp mill and industrial blast furnace. Now, this video is quite long, so we are going to cover this in another video. So these two machines are part of ore processing, and I'm going to do another video specifically about ore processing, so we are not going to cover these two machines in this video. So the next video in the series is about ore processing, ways to double your ores, ways to triple your ores. Okay? See you there.